I have no idea. It's strange to me that a doctor of divinity is a degree you can actually get, as if anyone knows more about divinity than anyone else. It's a straight, like, doctor of theology. Got it. I understand that. Doctor of divinity, go fuck yourself. It might as well be a doctor of wizardry. It's insane. And so, all right, I wanted to talk about this where he goes right into the authorship of the Gospels. And this is what he writes right here. This is Stroebel talking to Blomberg.
I love this. I underlined with an edge of challenge.
Oh, I can't wait. I know. Blomberg says, or Stroebel says, "Tell me this," I said with an edge of challenge in my voice. "Is it really possible to be an intelligent, critically thinking person and still believe that the four Gospels were written by the people whose names have been attached to them?" Blomberg set his cup of coffee on the edge of his desk and looked intently at me. "The answer is yes," he said with conviction. The gravity and weight he puts behind that. There were only 2, possibly 3 answers he could have given, but he made it seem like it was this earth-shattering thing. The answer is yes, you can believe it. I'm glad you caught that too.
I wanted to point that out first.
I love that.
To draw attention to this important moment. This is where I first wrote, "So skeptical. Reminds me of a wrong."
So, yep.
I'm not like the other skeptics. You're going to have to try a little harder. Did you hear the edge in my voice? I'm a bad girl skeptic.
Yeah, so they start going into this, and the first thing that Blomberg tells him is true. He says that, well, technically all the Gospels are anonymous. I was glad that he pointed that out first, but then I thought, well, what else is there to talk about then? If you
uniform testimony of the early church is like uniform. Like, that's such a strong word to like use, I feel like, about anything in scripture. And like, the answer is yes. That also, it's just so like certain. And it's like, how uniform was the belief of the authors? And he says, "I know no competitors."
Yes, yeah, I would get that.
It was not in dispute.
All right, yeah. So, all right, I'll get to exactly what Heather's talking about here. Is that Blomberg states that the Gospels are anonymous. No one's name is signed to any of these 4 documents. However, early church tradition states that these were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and everyone kind of agrees with that the early church said it. And my favorite thing is that he attacks the Synoptic Gospels first, where he says that, well, with Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's just no competitors for it. Like, that's the names that are on there. So and people seem to believe that, so it must be true. And Stroebel's like, yeah, that's it.
He's like, oh, okay, sounds good.
Yeah, that's it.
That's all I need is the word of this expert to tell me. I'm not going to like read any dissenting books other than Karen Armstrong. She's the only dissenting person.
I can't wait to get to Karen Armstrong. Cannot wait to get to Karen Armstrong. Can't wait. Well,
if Karen Armstrong said it, that's the only thing that matters as an argument.
I mean, it would be better. Karen Armstrong is infinitely more respected and known in this field than Blomberg. Are you fucking kidding me?
There's no one else he could possibly cite. He just keeps citing her and Blomberg. Like,
well, Armstrong doesn't agree with Blomberg. That's the funny part. Like, the person who has the actual credentials, which he does not list.
Yes. All he says is she used to be a nun. That's her entire list of credentials. She used to be a nun, and now she's not.
Yeah, that's hilarious. And
these opinions.
Yeah, which all right. Remind me. Well, actually, I have the notes because I got to mention
the mean girl in the rom-com.
I don't remember everyone he interviewed. I don't think we'll be seeing him go talk to Karen Armstrong. I don't think that's going to happen. I'd be very surprised if we find out that he interviews someone who actually knows what she's talking about. So he goes over to the Synoptic Gospels first. And see, did I write notes about the Synoptic Gospels in here? For people wondering what we mean. Oh, no, I'll get to that later. Okay. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And he says there's no competitors for this. And my question would be, no, he says, well, one reason that he believes these are actually written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he says, well, think about it. If someone was just slapping names on this and it wasn't legitimate, why would they pick someone like Matthew, who was a tax collector, or Mark or Luke, who weren't even part of the 12? I mean, that seems kind of odd, right? And it's like, okay, maybe, but if it's so important that these came from the disciples, why didn't they sign their names to the book? That seems like the obvious choice, right? Like if you were the apostle Matthew, that lends a lot of weight to it. It makes a lot more sense that someone came up with this than Matthew just forgot to sign this very important work, right?
Yeah, and like, I don't know. I felt bad as I was researching this because I was like, I feel bad to say for people to listen to me saying my opinions because I'm not a Bible scholar. Like the
Apparently, it doesn't take much to be one, so don't worry about it.
equivalent of a minor from a very bad Bible college apparently is like, and the Christian education I received in my elementary and high school years, like those are all my credentials I have to back up what I think about this. And I feel like someone like Dan McClellan, if he did like a thing about this, he'd be like, oh yeah, well here's all these important facts that prove this wrong. And I don't really know all of those facts. So I'm just going off of like opinions, kind of like you're saying.
Mhm.
Seems like they would have signed their name. I don't know if that's true though. I don't know if that was the cultural practice at the time.
Paul did multiple times. So, right.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, Paul did a bunch of them
In the
before the Gospels were written, by the way. So, yeah.
Huh. Yeah. And I mean, the guy did say, well, it seems like a proof that they were written by the people who we think wrote them is because like later gospels had more famous names signed to them, Mary.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I guess that argument does make sense to me, but it doesn't seem like a very powerful
It's
argument.
not evidence at all. It's not like at all. It's just no evidence
Maybe, like,
whatsoever. Yeah.
circumstantial evidence, like something like that, maybe.
It's not even circumstantial because it's not positive evidence. It's like, it reminds me of whenever I was going to save this for Alexander the Great, but a lot of times when you talk about the fact that there's no contemporary eyewitness accounts of Jesus, we don't have any writings about Jesus from anyone who was alive when Jesus was alive and saw him. We have nothing like that. The closest we have is Paul, who was alive when Jesus was alive but never saw him. And you bring this up to people.
Don't some people believe though that there were like I just because I thought that was a thing they tried really hard to prove in like New Testament survey
Mhm.
at Maranatha. I feel like they tried to show like actually like
what they reference is they reference what's his name? He's the Josephus. Josephus is the person that they'll reference a lot. Josephus never saw Jesus. Josephus was born like around the time Jesus died, like around 80 20, 80 30. He never met the man. And that's and Tacitus is another one that they'll reference who was born well after Jesus died, like maybe 20 years after he died or something like that. But
they say like Mark and Matthew and John, like don't they claim?
Well, but there's right.
Like,
They'll
some people
if you believe
did write it and that they were.
Yeah, if you believe that
they didn't, I don't think.
Right, if you believe the Gospels were written by Matthew and John, then you would have had two eyewitnesses, but there's no evidence by Matthew and John, and so that's what there's no like verified. And when you bring this up because like Jesus' resurrection, his crucifixion, it's not written about at all at the time, and when it happened. And people will cite that, well, listen, Jesus was an illiterate carpenter, itinerant preacher. Of course, you're not going to find any records about this guy. Why would you expect it? It's like, that's true. That's true. But you know what? It's also not evidence. I'm sorry. That's not my problem. And so that's what this reminds me of when they do that. Like, well, that's how it is. Okay, it's true, but it's not evidence. And so with the argument that we have,
well, just answering the question, was Jesus the Son of God and is the Bible true? I think like one of those questions is not really proving God exists.
Yes, yes, yeah. We're gonna get to that toward the end here, and so with those were his arguments of, and so I'll bring up what he said. You guys might be thinking this too, because Matthew, Mark, and Luke, not high heavy hitters in this game or whatever. And Strobel said, well, that sounds logical, but it was obvious that he was conveniently leaving out one of the gospel writers. What about John? I asked. He was extremely prominent. In fact, he wasn't just one of the 12 disciples, but one of Jesus' inner three, along with James and Peter. Yes, he's the one exception, Blomberg conceded with a nod. Guy paints a good picture. And interesting.
Also, while you're stopped, I just want to say, like, this is another thing that I was saying before, like how he says, Blomberg conveniently left out this fact.
Right, yeah.
I'm not so easily fooled like the other girls.
Right, yeah, it does seem like the way.
Blomberg. You're never gonna take me out for a fancy dinner if this is where you're going to play ball. Like, that's what it feels like to me with those little words that he throws in like that.
It's true. And interestingly, John is the only gospel about which there is some question about authorship and exactly what is in dispute. The name of the author isn't in doubt. It's certainly John, Blomberg replied. The question is whether it was John the Apostle or a different John. You see, the testimony of a Christian writer named Papias, dated about AD 125, refers to John the Apostle and John the Elder. And it's not clear from the context whether he's talking about one person from two perspectives or two different people. But granted that exception, the rest of the early testimony is unanimous that it was John the Apostle, the son of Zebedee, who wrote the gospel. When I read this, I actually had to pause myself where he said that there is no question that the author's name was John. I was like, really? I was like, because the book of Revelation is written by someone named John. It starts off, John, I am John, this is my writing. I was like, wait, does the Gospel of John say that? Because I'm pretty sure, I checked, of course it was anonymous. He just declaratively states the author is definitely named John, no evidence whatsoever. Like that is a lie. It kind of bothered me.
I feel like he does that over and over. Like he just says, like even here at the beginning of the first interview, Blomberg is one of the country's foremost authorities on the biographies of Jesus, which are called the four Gospels. One, maybe this is just me being ignorant, which is totally an option here, but I had never heard the Gospels referred to as biographies of Jesus, actually.
Yeah, you're right.
Way of putting it. And I see why it's important for him to throw that conjecture out there. But yeah, I've never heard them called biographies of Jesus. I thought of them more as like a history or something. But I guess they are kind of.
It's the closest thing to a biography because most biographies don't cover 2.5 years of someone's life. Like that's an odd word for it,
Which is why he had to then explain why they still call it a biography.
Yeah.
They only do that, and how in ancient times the stuff we think that is important for a biography was not important for them.
Yeah.
It counts as a biography. But like he just says, Craig Blomgard is widely considered to be one of the country's foremost authorities on the biographies of Jesus, which are called the four Gospels, period. There's nothing to back that up. You would think the next sentences are, because that's where he cites the man's credentials. The only thing these credentials prove are he graduated with a doctorate from Aberdeen University, and he was a research fellow at Tyndale House at Cambridge.
Yeah.
Where he wrote a series of acclaimed works about Jesus, and then he started working at the Denver Seminary. For some reason, I guess Cambridge didn't want to hire him.
Yeah. He was too good for Cambridge. He wanted to go in the real heavy hitters in Denver.
To go to a celebrated school.
Right, yeah.
Theological seminary. And so, like, that's it, as far as I can tell. Like, he's written some books about it, but, like, I don't know. I've never heard of him before. And his YouTube...
It's been 20 years. And I know who this guy is, right? Yeah.
The foremost authority in the nation on the historicity of Jesus, I guess. Like, there's something to prove this. So, like, he just makes claims like that over and over again in this chapter. This is cool. Let's move on.
Yes.
Close.
So after going way out on the limb there with Blomberg saying that the writer of the book is the author of the book is definitely someone named John, he references a man named Papias from AD 125. Now Papias was a Greek bishop from the late 1st and early 2nd century. He was born in AD 60, died in AD 130. And he wrote a document called Expositions on the Sayings of the Lord, a work that has been lost to time, but we still have surviving fragments and quotes from it. People quoted from the book after it was written. You can't quote a book before it's written, but they quoted the book, and so that's how we know it existed and what was written in there, but we don't have any full remaining copies of it. And in the work, Papias states that he gathered his information as follows. This is a quote from his book. Oh, wait. Next slide. This is Papias here. I shall not hesitate also to put into ordered form for you, along with interpretations, everything I learned carefully in the past from elders and noted down carefully for the truth of which I vouch. For unlike most people, he was a pick-me as well, I took no pleasure in those who told many different stories, but only in those who taught the truth. Nor did I take pleasure in those who reported their memory of someone else's commandments, but only in those who reported their memory of the commandments given by the Lord to the faith and proceeding from truth itself. And if by chance anyone who had been
a standard than Blomgard and
Stroebel
do.
And if by
way to explain why it's okay to not use firsthand, but to use the evidence other people saw and then move on to someone else. So that's funny.
And if by chance anyone who had been in attendance on the elders arrived, I made inquiries about the words of the elders, what Andrew or Peter had said, or Philip, Thomas, James, John, Matthew, or any of the Lord's disciples, and whatever Aristian and John the elder, the Lord's disciples, were saying. For I did not think that information from books would profit me as much as information from a living and surviving source. Now, what he mentions there is the thing about John, and John, it mentions 2 Johns. It mentions in the list of the apostles, he's like, I took these notes from people who talked to the apostles, Peter, Andrew, James, John, so on and so forth. I also talked to 2 guys, Aristian and John the elder. And so that is Blomberg's evidence that John wrote the Gospel of John. That what we just read right there, that is his evidence that it was someone named John, because Papias seemed to, I'll get to this also, Papias seemed to insinuate that Matthew and Mark were written by Matthew and Mark, and he said that he knew people who knew John. So clearly John wrote, that's it. That is as flimsy as the evidence gets for him. But it's even better, because if you were to look up information about Papias, where goes the other?
Well, I want you to know, put your mind at ease, because 23, it says, it was just not in dispute.
It was not in dispute. Nobody.
Not in dispute is the authorship of the Gospels.
It's just funny.
We didn't have to talk that much. We knew.
It's funny you say that, because as we dive into this, not only was it not in dispute at this time, it may not even have been talked about at all at this time. And we'll get to that here on who wrote these 4 Gospels. Like, it wasn't really the first person. Well, I'll get to it a little bit. But anyway, Papias, he wrote a little bit about Matthew and Mark, which is like, if you actually Google Papias and look up his writings, people will refer to him as saying the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, but not John. Like, this guy came up with the John thing all by himself. Like, you won't find that anywhere other than, than Blomberg. But this is what he has to say about Matthew and Mark. So in the book that Papias wrote, he wrote about Mark. Mark, indeed, who became the interpreter of Peter, wrote accurately, as far as he remembered them, the things said or done by the Lord, but not, however, in order. For he had neither heard the Lord nor been his personal follower, but at a later stage, as I said, he had followed Peter, who used to adapt the teachings to the needs of the moment, but not as though he were drawing up a connected account of the oracles of the Lord, so that Mark committed no error in writing certain matters just as he remembered them. For he had only one object in view, namely to leave out nothing of the things which he had heard, and include no false statement among them. And about Matthew, he wrote, and so Matthew composed the sayings in the Hebrew tongue, and each one interpreted them to the best of his abilities. Now, that is what a lot of people will reference, saying, well, by AD 125, which would have been about 50 years after Mark was written, 10 to 20 years after John were written, that he's like, okay, clearly he's saying that the books of Matthew and Mark were written by Matthew and Mark from his secondhand account, which is pretty close. You know, it's not bad. Could be worse. But the thing about this is when he talks about Mark, he never mentions that this is the Gospel of Mark. We don't really know. He said that Mark knew Peter, and Peter told Mark some things, and Mark wrote some things down. We don't know if he's talking about our Gospel of Mark. We have no idea. He almost certainly is not talking about the Gospel of Matthew that we know. That one, I'm a layman too on this, but I'm fairly confident about this because he wrote right there that Matthew wrote the works of Jesus down in two ways. He wrote, I'll pull it back up here. He says that, so Matthew composed the sayings in the Hebrew tongue. And so the sayings were like the Q source, which would just been like quotes from Jesus. That's where a lot of these books were. They were just quotes that people attributed to Jesus. And he said he wrote it in Hebrew. All of the Gospels, every damn one of them was written in Koine Greek. This is not up for debate. That it is clearly not a translation. You won't find anyone anywhere who says, like even the most conservative Christians, scholars on this, who will say that Matthew was written in Hebrew. Can't happen. So this is referencing Matthew maybe wrote some stuff down about Jesus in Hebrew, but it's almost impossible that he's talking about the Matthew that we know and love. So then he jumps forward. Now, when I mentioned that the gospel writers, how it wasn't in dispute and how it wasn't even a discussion back then, that the first person to actually assign names to these four gospels that we know, he mentions in the book, it's a man named Irenaeus. Irenaeus, I can't remember how to say it, but Irenaeus is the first person. This was around AD 180 is when Irenaeus said, these books, I believe, were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So, 60 years before that, it probably wasn't a dispute because it wasn't really a discussion. But I put the quote that he has from Irenaeus in here, where he says, Irenaeus, writing around AD 180, confirmed the traditional authorship. In fact, here, he said, reaching for a book, he flipped it open and read Irenaeus' words. Matthew published his own gospel among the Hebrews in their own tongue. Once again, book of Matthew not written in Hebrew. When Peter and Paul were preaching in the gospel in Rome and founding the church there. After their departure, Mark, the disciple interpreter of Peter himself, handed down to us in writing the substance of Peter's preaching. Luke, the follower of Paul, set down in a book the gospel preached by his teacher. Then John, the disciple of the Lord, who also leaned on his breast, himself produced the gospel as he was living in Ephesus in Asia. This is the first time anybody says that those four books were Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And note the date there, AD 180. This is a full 110 years after the book of Mark was written. It is a long, long gap between the creation of the authorship of these books and the names being assigned to them. And I see why it's very important in Christian circles to say, hey, we have a direct link to the life of Jesus. These guys can be trusted here. But it was several decades before they were written and a century before they were even assigned.
I just would say, though, to be fair, like all of that is not proof that the Gospels are not written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Like that's not proof necessarily, because, and I don't know, like it is disappointing to hear that Matthew would have been writing in Hebrew, and that the gospel was written in Koine Greek. But at the same time, I mean, every Bible we read now has been translated like many times. So that doesn't mean that like if you believe the Bible is the inspired word of God, like the information having been transmitted through a couple different languages Like, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true. Just like they're not proving it is true. I don't think the things you're saying prove that it isn't true necessarily. Don't you think?
Well, it depends on what question you're trying to answer. Like, are you trying to answer the question, are these books written by these four men? Or is the question trying to answer, can I prove they weren't written by these four men? And you can't ever do that. Like, there's no way that you could possibly prove, like, no evidence outside of a video camera recording someone writing it. Yeah, there's no way to prove it wasn't written by somebody. So I just think it's the wrong question. It kind of deflects from the intent of the scholarship, right?
Because like the question he's trying to answer is, did Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John
Right.
actually write the books? And they either had firsthand evidence or they were working with, they were just like writing down what someone who did have firsthand evidence was saying. That's the question he's trying to answer.
Right.
Right? And he's trying to prove that the only answer is yes. Like, they wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm
obviously wrote it. Yeah.
Like, and that's what everybody thinks. So I guess if you just can throw doubt on that being true, you've like won the argument.
I think it just gets a lot worse though as the chapter goes on.